snow swallowed sound that night. In Stillwater, silence wasn't peace anymore, it was a warning. Ava Renner stood in the pale wash of headlights, breath misting as three dark figures approached. Jason Butler was beside her, shoulders tense, eyes darting like a cornered animal. For a brief, trembling moment, neither spoke. They didn't have to. Truth had finally decided to show up, and it came with badges. One of the men stepped forward, his voice flat, official. "Dr. Renner, Mr. Butler, you need to come with us." Jason shook his head. "You said you wanted the truth," he muttered, "that they only want the silence." Ava's pulse hammered. "Are we under arrest?" she asked. The man's eyes barely flicked up. "You're under protection," he said. "For your own safety." The word tasted wrong. Protection. That was what the system always said when it wanted to hide someone long enough for the public to forget. She glanced at Jason. "Do you trust them?" He gave a hollow laugh. "I trusted them once. That's how we got here." The headlights dimmed as the snow thickened. Somewhere behind the clouds, the world kept spinning people asleep. Laws unchallenged, stories unwritten. And in that forgotten train yard, the next chapter of Stillwater's reckoning began. They were driven through the night in silence. No one spoke, no one explained. The car's heater hummed low, and outside, the world blurred into shades of white and shadow. Ava tried to memorize the turns, but she lost track after the third highway exit. Jason sat beside her, eyes closed, jaw clenched. He didn't look like the boy from the courthouse photos anymore. He looked like someone trying to outstare his own reflection. Hours later, the car stopped at what looked like an old government facility, a box of concrete buried in snow. They were led inside, past metal doors and flickering lights, into a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. "Wait here," the agent said. The door clicked shut. Jason exhaled slowly. "Now you see it," he said. "The system doesn't fix itself. It buries what it breaks." Ava leaned back, studying him. "Then why call me?" He hesitated, then rubbed his palms together like he was trying to wash something invisible off them. "Because I can't carry it anymore," he said. "What they called mercy wasn't mercy, it was management. They let me go to keep others quiet. But someone paid for it. Someone always does." Her stomach turned. "Who?" He met her eyes. "The witness." Back in Stillwater, the headlines had already shifted. Federal agents intervene in ongoing plea bargain review. Whistleblower protection confirmed. Renner and Butler in custody for questioning. The public didn't know what that meant, but speculation grew like wildfire. Some called Jason a coward, others called him a martyr. The truth, as always, was quieter and more complicated. Inside the concrete walls, Ava pressed him for details. Every answer led to another wound. "There was a girl," Jason said finally. "You know about her, but not all of it. She wasn't just a victim, they said she was the risk. Her testimony could have exposed something bigger. Connections between the prosecutor's donors, the sheriff's brother, a charity fund for campaign money. They called it an accident, a plea bargain for the greater good, but I was just a face. They used me to end it before it spread." He looked away. "And when she disappeared from the record, they called it closure." Ava stared at him, every nerve on edge. "And you let them?" "I was 19, he whispered. "I didn't even know who them was. I thought I was being forgiven. Turns out I was being used." The room hummed with fluorescent silence. She believed him, not because he sounded innocent, But because guilt had finally given him a vocabulary, she leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" He nodded slowly. "Not much. Just copies of old communications, notes from my lawyer emails that were meant to disappear. I kept them, thinking I might need them one day. I didn't realize that day would look like this." When the agents returned, Ava demanded to know who they worked for. "Federal," one said, but offered no badge. Another told her to stay offline, no calls, no press. "We're trying to keep you both safe," he insisted. She almost laughed. From what truth? But he didn't answer. By morning, Jason was gone. They told her he'd been relocated for debriefing. She knew what that meant. The same word had been used decades ago for activists, informants, anyone whose story frightened the right people. She spent 2 more nights locked in that place, time bleeding into fluorescent hours, mind circling the same thought. If justice hides its witnesses, what hope does truth have? When they finally released her, she was warned not to travel, not to contact the press, not to escalate matters. She walked into the cold morning alone, coat dusted with frost, the taste of metal still in her throat. But she wasn't going to disappear. She opened her phone, ignored the warnings, and sent one message to her producer. "Get me airtime. Prime slot. I'm ready." The broadcast aired 3 days later. Ava sat beneath the studio lights, posture calm, voice steady. She didn't accuse. She didn't dramatize. She told a story, one about a system that calls silence safety, one that labels compromise as justice. She mentioned Jason Butler only once, calling him a mirror, not a monster. The episode exploded online. Hashtags trended. Senators tweeted support. But behind the scenes, calls poured into networks demanding retractions, claiming misinformation. Some advertisers pulled funding. By midnight, the station's website went down under the weight of both outrage and curiosity. And far away in a windowless room, Jason watched the broadcast on a muted screen. The agents had confiscated his phone, but one of them had left the TV on. He saw Ava's face, her words glowing like a confession carved into fire. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. "She did it," he whispered. "She actually did it." Then the door opened. "Time to move," the agent said. Jason hesitated. "Where are we going?" "Doesn't matter," came the answer. "Just remember, we protected you." Jason laughed under his breath. "From her or from you?" No one replied. In the days that followed, America turned inward. Talk shows debated whether Jason Butler was a whistleblower or a manipulator. Ava was called both hero and traitor. But for the first time in decades, congressional hearings discussed plea reform, transparency, and judicial funding. It was progress, but progress always comes with ghosts. She began receiving encrypted messages from anonymous accounts, some supportive, others threatening. One simply said, "You opened the wrong door. Now they'll close it permanently." She refused to stop. She formed a small team, law students, journalists, retired judges, all volunteers who believed that exposure was protection. They began compiling stories, building what they called the Ledger, a database of suppressed plea agreements, sealed evidence, and judicial patterns. The Ledger went live 6 months later. It didn't name names, it named patterns. And patterns can be more dangerous than people. It was accessed by millions in the first week. And then, just as suddenly, it was hacked. The database wiped clean, backups corrupted, sources leaked. Ava sat staring at the blank screen, her hands trembling. The message left behind was short: reform denied. For a moment, she felt the crushing sense of defeat that buries so many good intentions. But then she remembered something Jason had said in that cold room. They used me to stop the story from spreading. And she realized they couldn't stop it anymore. The story had already multiplied. Copies of the ledger had been mirrored across servers worldwide. Activists reuploaded fragments, journalists rewrote findings, communities began holding mock trials, online citizens judging the judges. The government called it chaos. Ava called it democracy waking up. Still water became shorthand for every place where fairness failed. High schools taught it. Universities analyzed it. Lawmakers quoted it without irony. But beneath the surface, resistance brewed quiet, coordinated, relentless. Not everyone wanted reform. Some wanted revenge. Ava knew she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was followed. Her apartment was searched. Friends distanced themselves out of fear. But she pressed on because the moment reform becomes safe, it stops being real. Then one night she received another email. No address, no signature. Just one attachment, a video file. It opened to a shaky frame, a man in a dim room, eyes tired, voice low. Jason Butler. "If you're watching this," he said, "I'm already gone. They'll say it was an accident or a relapse or a misunderstanding. It won't be. I kept everything: emails, files, notes from the people who pulled the strings. I sent them somewhere no one can erase them. You'll find them when truth is ready to stand trial." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "Don't make me the story. Make the system answer instead." Then the screen cut to black. Ava sat frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't breathe. She only whispered, "You finally testified." The next morning, the news broke. Jason Butler was dead. The official statements said overdose. The autopsy said uncertainty. The country split in half. Some mourned, others scoffed. But Ava knew what she'd seen. She took his words and turned them into a message. In her next broadcast, she spoke calmly, directly into the camera. When truth dies, it doesn't disappear. It reincarnates in those who still dare to speak. Jason Butler wasn't a saint. He was a symptom. But his confession demands a cure. For a long moment, she just stared at the lens, as if speaking to someone far beyond the studio walls. "Reform isn't about changing the law," she said. "It's about changing who the law serves." The feed ended. But outside, thousands were already marching. Candles, banners, faces, ordinary people reclaiming the right to demand fairness. A government couldn't suppress it anymore. A bipartisan reform bill passed committee. Grants were approved for judicial oversight. Law schools began mandatory ethics programs. The cracks were widening, and through them, light was bleeding in. Ava watched it all unfold from her small office, exhaustion etched in her face. She thought about Jason, the girl whose name was erased, the judge who whispered poetry into broken courtrooms. And she wondered if this finally was how healing looked. Not loud, not perfect, but persistent. Then, one evening, as she prepared for another broadcast, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a hard drive wrapped in brown paper. A note taped to it read, "From a friend of the witness." She connected it to her laptop. Folders filled the screen labeled with dates, initials, and one word repeated across them all. Still water. Her hands shook. The files were detailed correspondence between prosecutors, donors, and local officials. It wasn't just Jason's case. It was a network, a map of influence and immunity stretching across counties, maybe states. She realized suddenly that the ledger hadn't failed. It had evolved. Someone, maybe several someones, had kept the truth alive in the shadows. And now it was back in her hands. She looked out the window, watching the city lights blur into gold and gray. She could almost hear Jason's voice, make the system answer, so she decided to. The next episode of her program wasn't a discussion, it was an indictment. She read the emails aloud, redacted the names, exposed the structure. Viewers flooded in by millions. It wasn't scandal anymore, it was awakening. Governors called for investigations, judges resigned, and the world began to see the face of reform not as a savior, but as a collective. But even then, Ava knew it wasn't over, because every revelation breeds retaliation. And 2 days later, her studio was raided. The footage was cut mid-sentence. Her last words, broadcast live before the screen went black, were simple. They can silence voices. They can't erase echoes. The nation erupted. Protesters filled streets from Stillwater to D.C. Lawsuits piled up. Anonymous leaks multiplied. Justice had awakened, not as a person, but as a pursuit that refused to die. Weeks later, a secure link appeared on encrypted forums containing every file Ava had read, plus more. The source was untraceable. The uploader used one alias, Witness Zero. Some said it was a coalition of whistleblowers. Others said it was Jason's insurance plan, triggered after his death. No one could prove it. But it didn't matter, because the truth was out again. And once truth breathes, it doesn't go back to sleep. Stillwater became more than a name. It became a warning and a promise. Law schools renamed ethics awards after the girl who'd vanished from records. Jason's story became a case study. Ava's broadcasts were archived, dissected, quoted. Years later, when a new generation of students asked how reform began, the answer wasn't a law or a politician. It was a whisper in the snow, a voice that said, "Justice isn't blind, she's watching who we become." But somewhere deep inside a government server, sealed behind layers of encryption, a folder remained locked. Its title was short, chilling, familiar. Stillwater _ continued, and one line of code beneath it pulsed like a heartbeat. Truth never ends. It waits. To be continued in episode 4, Witness Zero.